20 years with electricity. Time to give this story a jolt.
Nothing says happy marriage like your wife inviting her ex-boyfriend to dinner and expecting you to smile about it. I'm Jamie Parrish, 38 years old, co-owner of Parrish Electrical, and apparently the biggest fool in suburban Michigan. Jamie, you remember Kyle, don't you? Beth's voice dripped honey as she gestured toward the lanky man sitting at my dining room table, eating my food, drinking my wine, and eyeing my wife like she was dessert. Kyle Morrison, Beth's ex from college, the same Kyle who'd stolen $2,000 from her parents' safe during Christmas break 15 years ago. The same Kyle who'd been in and out of rehab 3 times before mysteriously landing a job at Beth's marketing firm 6 months ago. Sure do, I said, forcing a smile. How's the recovery going, Kyle? Beth shot me a warning look. Our daughters, Bree and Beau, 15 and 13 respectively, shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They weren't stupid. They could feel the tension crackling like electricity through a damaged wire. Great, actually, Kyle grinned, showing teeth that were too white, too perfect. Probably cost more than most people's cars. Beth's been incredibly supportive. Haven't you, sweetheart? Sweetheart, in my house, at my table. Kyle's been working so hard on the Henderson account, Beth said, her hand briefly touching his arm. We've been putting in long hours together. Long hours, right. I'd noticed those long hours, the late nights, the weekend emergencies, the sudden need for out-of-town conferences that never seemed to produce any actual business results. My brother John chose that moment to arrive, fashionably late as always. John Parrish, the golden child, 2 years older, 6 inches taller, and blessed with the kind of natural charm that made people forget he'd never actually earned anything in his life. Sorry I'm late, John announced, kissing Beth's cheek a little too familiarly. Traffic was homicide. He shook Kyle's hand like they were old friends, which struck me as odd since I'd never mentioned Kyle to John. But then again, there were a lot of things about my family that struck me as odd lately. So Kyle, John said, settling into his chair, Beth tells me you two have been working closely together. The way he said it made my jaw clench. There was something in his tone, a knowing quality that made me feel like everyone was in on a joke except me. Very closely, Kyle agreed, and Beth actually giggled. Giggled like a teenager instead of a 36-year-old mother of 2. I watched my daughters exchange glances. Bree, my clever 13-year-old, looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Beau, my athlete, just stared at her plate with the kind of focused intensity she usually reserved for track meets. I think we're making my husband jealous, Beth said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. That's when I felt it. The exact moment when something inside me snapped, not broke, snapped, like a wire carrying too much current, finally giving way under the pressure. I stood up slowly, deliberately. The conversation died. Everyone stared at me, waiting for the explosion, the angry outburst, the dramatic scene that would let them paint me as the unreasonable one. Instead, I smiled. A real smile, probably the first genuine one I'd worn in months. You know what? I said quietly. I think I'll let you all enjoy the rest of dinner without me. I walked out of the dining room, out of the house, and into the garage where I kept my tools, my truck, and apparently, what was left of my dignity. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices, probably discussing what a poor sport I was, how I couldn't take a joke, how I was being paranoid. But as I sat in my truck in the dark garage, I wasn't thinking about their opinions. I was thinking about wires, about circuits, about what happens when you overload a system and then act surprised when it burns down everything around it. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they were about to learn that I'd been working with electricity for 20 years, and I knew exactly how to make things spark. Monday morning came with the kind of gray drizzle that made everything look dirty. I arrived at Parrish Electrical before dawn, the way I had every day for the past 15 years. The building sat in an industrial part of town that most people drove through without stopping. Brick warehouses, chain-link fences, and the kind of businesses that kept the world running while everyone else slept. Carl Robertson was already there, bent over a set of blueprints with a cup of coffee that could probably strip paint. Carl had been my right-hand man since I'd started the company with John, back when we'd both been young and stupid enough to think blood was thicker than business. "Morning, boss," Carl said without looking up. "You look like heck." "Feel worse," I admitted. pouring myself coffee from the pot that had been brewing since sometime during the Clinton administration. "Carl, I need you to pull some files for me." "What kind of files?" "The kind that show every job Beth's company has done for us in the past year. Every invoice, every work order, every time they've been in this building." Carl's eyebrows went up, but he didn't ask questions. That was one of the things I liked about him. 23 years in the Navy had taught him when to follow orders and when to mind his own business. While Carl gathered the paperwork, I made my way to the security office. We'd installed cameras throughout the building 2 years ago, after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. What most people didn't know was that the system kept digital records going back 18 months. I spent the next 3 hours reviewing footage, cross-referencing it with the work orders Carl had pulled. What I found made my coffee taste like battery acid. Beth's emergency inventory checks always happened on nights when John claimed to be out of town. Kyle's equipment inspections coincided perfectly with times when I was on job sites across the county. And the two of them together, in my building, in my office, going through my files, my computer, my life. But the real kicker came when I pulled John's travel records from the company credit card statements. Those out-of-town trips he'd been taking, half of them never happened. The hotel charges were local. The restaurant receipts were from places 10 minutes from Beth's office. My brother and my wife, the two people I'd trusted most in the world, working together to destroy everything I'd built. I printed everything, every receipt, every time-stamped photo, every piece of evidence that proved what I already knew in my gut. Then I called my sister Connie. Connie Parrish Williams was a lawyer, the kind who wore $1,000 suits and ate opposing counsel for breakfast. She was also the only member of my family who'd never asked me for money, never expected me to clean up her mistakes, and never treated me like the family disappointment. "Jamie?" Her voice was sharp with concern. "It's barely 9 in the morning. What's wrong?" "I need to see you, today, and Connie. Bring everything you know about divorce law in Michigan." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. "How bad is it?" she finally asked. "Bad enough that I'm about to find out who my real friends are." We met at a diner on the other side of town, the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the pie was homemade, and nobody cared about your problems as long as you tipped the waitress. Connie arrived in full lawyer mode, briefcase, power suit, and an expression that could freeze water. I laid out everything. The dinner party, the security footage, the fake business trips, the pattern of lies that stretched back months. Connie listened without interrupting, taking notes in the kind of precise handwriting they probably taught in law school. "You're sure about this?" she asked when I finished. "I'm sure. Because once we start this process, there's no going back. Beth will fight dirty. John will try to squeeze you out of the business. Your friends will pick sides." I thought about that for a moment. My friends. Most of them were really Beth's friends, or couple friends who'd probably find it easier to drop the suddenly single guy than deal with the awkwardness of divided loyalties. "Let them," I said. "I'd rather know where I stand than keep living a lie." Connie nodded and opened her briefcase. "Then let's burn it all down." The next 2 weeks moved like a chess game played by masters. Every move calculated, every counter move anticipated. Connie filed the divorce papers on a Thursday morning, citing adultery and abandonment. By Thursday afternoon, Beth was calling my phone every 10 minutes, her voice climbing higher with each voicemail. I didn't answer. I was too busy implementing what Connie called financial containment. Joint credit cards canceled, bank accounts frozen, the house, which was in my name thanks to an inheritance from my grandfather, secured with new locks and a restraining order that kept Beth from entering without supervision. John tried a different approach. He showed up at the office Friday morning with coffee and donuts like we were still brothers instead of business partners on opposite sides of a war. "Jamie, we need to talk," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk like he owned the place, which technically he did, at least 40% of it. "I'm listening. This thing with Beth, it's complicated." "Adultery usually is." John's face flushed red. "It's not what you think." "Really?" "Because what I think is that my brother and my wife have been screwing each other behind my back for months, using my own business as their personal love nest. Am I wrong?" The silence stretched between us like a high-voltage line. John stared at his hands, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I want to buy you out," he said finally. "Excuse me?" "Your shares in the company. I'll give you fair market value. You can take the money, start fresh somewhere else." Clean slate for everyone. I leaned back in my chair and studied my brother's face. The golden child, the one who'd always gotten everything handed to him, now trying to take the last thing I had left. What's fair market value, John? I had it appraised, 200,000. I laughed. Actually, laughed out loud. 200? John, we cleared 400,000 in profit last year alone. The building is worth more than 200. The equipment, the client list, the contracts we have in place, you're trying to buy me out for about 20 cents on the dollar. It's a fair offer considering the circumstances. What circumstances? The circumstance where you've been sleeping with my wife? John stood up fast enough to knock over his coffee. Enough! You want to play hardball? Fine, but remember, I know where all the bodies are buried in this company. I know about the corners we cut on the Morrison job. I know about the inspection reports we fudged on the hospital contract. You want to go to war with me, Jamie? You'll lose everything. That's when I smiled. The same smile I'd worn at the dinner table 2 weeks ago. The smile that said I knew something he didn't. John, I said quietly, you just made a very big mistake. The recording app on my phone had been running since he'd walked into my office. Every word, every threat, every admission of illegal activity, all of it captured in perfect digital clarity. Get out of my office, I said. And John, next time you want to threaten me, you might want to check if I'm recording first. The look on his face was worth every sleepless night I'd had since this whole mess started. John didn't take the recording well. I found that out at 2 a.m. when he decided to express his feelings by throwing a brick through my living room window. The security cameras caught everything. John's truck in my driveway. John's face clearly visible in the streetlight. John picking up the brick from my own garden border and hurling it through the glass like a teenage vandal instead of a 40-year-old business owner. I called the police, filed a report, and added vandalism to the growing list of charges that would make John's life interesting. Then I called my insurance company, my lawyer, and the local news station that loved stories about successful businessmen behaving badly. But John wasn't done. He showed up at the office the next morning with 2 guys I didn't recognize. Big guys with the kind of muscles that came from prison yards rather than gyms. We need to settle this, John announced, pushing past Mary, our receptionist who looked ready to call emergency. It's okay, Mary, I told her. Why don't you take an early lunch? She grabbed her purse and practically ran for the door. Smart woman. Nice friends, I said, nodding toward John's companions. Let me guess, you met them at one of those networking events you're always attending? Shut up, Jamie. You think you're so smart with your recordings and your lawyers, but you forgot one thing. What's that? I still own 40% of this company, which means I have access to everything, including the safe. The safe. The fireproof, combination-locked safe where we kept the most sensitive documents, backup drives, and emergency cash. John had known the combination since we'd bought the thing. You're going to open that safe, John continued, and you're going to give me every copy of every recording, every document, every piece of evidence you think you have against me. Then you're going to sign the buyout papers I brought. I looked at the 2 muscleheads flanking my brother. They looked bored, like this was just another day at the office for them. And if I don't, then my friends here are going to help you remember why family loyalty matters. That's when Carl walked in from the warehouse, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of expression that meant business. Morning, boss, he said, nodding to me before turning to John. Didn't know we were having a meeting. Private family business, Carl, John said. Why don't you go find something else to do? Carl looked at me and I saw 23 years of military service in his eyes. Boss? Actually, Carl, I think you should stay. John was just leaving. No, John said, his voice rising. I'm not leaving until... He never finished the sentence. Carl moved faster than a man his age had any right to, stepping between John and me with the kind of casual confidence that made John's hired muscle suddenly look very interested in their shoes. Gentlemen, Carl said politely, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is private property and you weren't invited. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The bigger of John's 2 friends started to say something, but Carl held up a hand. Before you make any decisions you might regret, you should know that I've already called the police. They're about 3 minutes out. You can leave now as free men, or you can explain to the officers why you're trespassing on private property with the apparent intent to commit extortion. John's face went through several interesting color changes. This isn't over, Jamie. Yeah, it is, I said. It's been over since the moment you decided to betray me. You just haven't figured it out yet. After they left, Carl and I stood in the silence of the office, listening to the distant sound of sirens approaching. Thanks, I said. Don't mention it. But, boss, you might want to think about upgrading our security system. And maybe investing in some cameras for your house. Already on it. Good, because something tells me your brother isn't the type to give up easy. Carl was right. But then again, neither was I. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. Parish Electrical had been incorporated with 3 shareholders. John and I each held 40%, and our mother Ruth held the remaining 20% as the tiebreaker vote. It was supposed to ensure family unity. Instead, it had become the battlefield where the future of the company would be decided. I spent the week preparing, not just gathering evidence. I'd had plenty of that for weeks now. I was preparing for war. Connie helped me understand the corporate bylaws that John had probably never bothered to read. There was a clause buried in the fine print that allowed for the removal of a board member who engaged in activities detrimental to the company's reputation or financial stability. Ruth arrived at the office 20 minutes early, wearing the kind of black dress she usually reserved for funerals. At 73, she was still sharp as a tack, and twice as dangerous when crossed. She'd built Parish Electrical from nothing after my father died, and she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Jamie," she said, settling into her chair at the conference table, "I hope you know what you're doing." "I do. This is going to destroy the family." "The family destroyed itself, Mom. I'm just cleaning up the mess." John arrived exactly on time, flanked by a lawyer I didn't recognize. A thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in making problems disappear. "Mother," John said, kissing Ruth's cheek. "Jamie," he nodded in my direction like we were strangers. "Let's get started," Ruth said. "John, you called this meeting." "That's right." John's lawyer opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "We're here to discuss the buyout offer my client made to Mr. Jamie Parish, an offer that was rejected without proper consideration." "I considered it," I said. "It was insulting." "The offer is fair market value based on current assessments," the lawyer continued. "My client is prepared to increase the offer by 10% as a gesture of goodwill." "How generous," I said. $220,000 for a company that's worth over $1 million. Ruth's eyebrows went up. "Is that accurate, John? You're offering your brother 20 cents on the dollar?" "The circumstances require—" "What circumstances?" Ruth's voice could have cut glass. John and his lawyer exchanged glances. "There have been some personal issues that make it difficult for Jamie and me to continue as business partners." "Personal issues," Ruth repeated. "You mean the fact that you've been sleeping with his wife?" The silence in the room was deafening. John's face went white, then red, then white again. "I don't know where you heard—" "I heard it from the security footage," Ruth said calmly. "Jamie showed me everything. Every late-night visit, every fake business trip, every lie you've told for the past 6 months. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" John looked at me with pure hatred. "You poisoned her against me." "I showed her the truth. There's a difference." Ruth stood up slowly, her hands flat on the conference table. "Jonathan Parish, as the majority shareholder of this company, I am calling for a vote of no confidence. You have violated your fiduciary duty to this company, engaged in activities detrimental to our reputation, and betrayed the trust of your business partner. I move that you be removed from the board immediately." "You can't do this," John's lawyer said. "My client has rights." "Your client has the right to remain silent," I said, pulling out my phone and playing the recording of John's threats from the previous week. "Because anything he says is going to be used against him in court." The lawyer listened to John's voice, admitting to cutting corners on jobs, fudging inspection reports, and threatening violence. By the time the recording finished, the man was already packing his briefcase. "I'll need to consult with my client privately," he said. "Take all the time you need," Ruth said. "The vote is tomorrow at 9 a.m., with or without you." After they left, Ruth and I sat in the empty conference room, listening to the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic. "Your father would be proud of you," she said finally. "Would he? You could have handled this quietly, paid them off, walked away, started over somewhere else. Instead, you chose to fight for what's yours. That takes courage." "It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like survival." Ruth smiled, and for a moment, I saw the woman who had built this company from nothing, who had raised 3 children alone, who had never backed down from a fight in her life. Sometimes, she said, they're the same thing. The vote was unanimous. Ruth and I voted John out of the company, which meant his 40% share reverted to the remaining shareholders according to the corporate bylaws. I now owned 60% of Parish Electrical, with Ruth retaining 40% until she decided to retire. John's reaction was predictable. He hired a different lawyer, filed for an injunction, and threatened to sue everyone from me to the mailman. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his legal options were limited. Beth's reaction was more creative. She decided to go after my daughters. I found out about it from Bree, who called me from school in tears. "Dad, Mom's here. She's saying she's taking us to live with her and Uncle John. She has papers." I was in my truck before Bree finished talking, driving toward the school with my heart hammering against my ribs. The papers Beth had were fake. Connie confirmed it with a single phone call to the courthouse, but that didn't stop her from causing a scene in the principal's office. I arrived to find Beth screaming at the principal, the school secretary, and anyone else who would listen. She was demanding her daughters, threatening lawsuits, and making the kind of spectacle that would be talked about at PTA meetings for years to come. "Beth," I said quietly from the doorway. She spun around, her face flushed and her hair disheveled. "Jamie, tell them they have to let me take my girls." "Our girls. And no, I won't. I'm their mother." "You're also the woman who abandoned them to shack up with my brother. The woman who chose her affair over her family. The woman who just tried to kidnap them with forged legal documents. The principal, a woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had dealt with difficult parents for 30 years, stepped between us. "Mr. Parrish, we've called the police. They should be here shortly." "Good," I said. "Beth, you need to leave. Now." "I'm not going anywhere without my daughters." "Yeah, you are." The police arrived 10 minutes later. 2 officers who took statements, reviewed the fake custody papers, and arrested Beth for attempted kidnapping and forgery. As they led her away in handcuffs, she screamed threats and accusations that echoed down the school hallway. Bree and Bo watched from the principal's office window, their faces pale and shocked. "Is Mom going to jail?" Bo asked. "For tonight, probably. After that, it depends on what the judge decides." "Good," Bree said quietly. "I hope she stays there." That evening, the 3 of us sat in our living room eating pizza and trying to pretend that everything was normal. The girls did homework while I answered emails and returned phone calls from clients who had heard rumors about the company changes. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 people I hadn't expected. Tom and Jennifer Martinez, who had been our couple friends for over 5 years. "Jamie," Jennifer said when I opened the door, "we heard about what happened at the school. We wanted to make sure you and the girls were okay." I let them in, offered coffee, and waited for the real reason for their visit. It didn't take long. "We also wanted to talk to you about everything that's been happening," Tom said. "With Beth and John and the divorce." "Okay." Jennifer twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed during previous difficult conversations. "The thing is, Jamie, we've been friends with both of you for a long time. And this situation, it's really awkward for everyone." "I'm sure it is." "Beth called us," Tom said. "She's really upset. She says you've been vindictive, that you're trying to turn everyone against her." I set down my coffee cup and studied their faces. Tom looked uncomfortable. Jennifer looked guilty. They'd already made their choice. "What exactly did Beth tell you?" "That you planted evidence to make it look like she was having an affair. That you're using your money and connections to destroy her reputation. That you're keeping her from seeing her own daughters. And you believe her?" They exchanged glances. "We don't know what to believe," Jennifer said. "But Beth is our friend too, and she's in a really bad place right now. She needs support. She needs consequences," I said. "There's a difference." Tom leaned forward. "Look, Jamie, we're not taking sides. We just think maybe you could dial back the legal stuff a little. Let her see the girls. Work something out that doesn't involve lawyers and court dates." "Tom, did Beth mention that I have security footage of her and John together in my office? Did she tell you about the fake custody papers she tried to use to kidnap my daughters? Did she explain why she chose to have an affair with my brother instead of talking to me about whatever problems we were having?" Silence. "I didn't think so," I said, standing up. Here's the thing about not taking sides. When someone is clearly wrong, neutrality is just cowardice with better marketing. Jennifer's face flushed. "That's not fair." Fair? You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been my wife talking to me instead of screwing my brother. Fair would have been my friends asking for my side of the story before showing up here to lecture me about being vindictive. Fair would have been anyone, actually caring about what this has done to my daughters. Tom stood up too. We're trying to help. No, you're trying to make yourselves feel better about choosing the wrong side. There's a difference. They left without another word. Through the window, I watched them sit in their car for several minutes, probably discussing what a bastard I'd become, how the divorce had changed me, how they'd tried to help, but I was too angry to listen. An hour later, my phone started buzzing with text messages. Other friends, other couples, all with variations of the same theme. Maybe I should consider mediation. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe Beth deserved another chance. By midnight, I had heard from 8 different people, all of whom thought they knew better than I did how to handle my own life. I turned off my phone and went to check on my daughters. They were both asleep finally, after a day that had probably aged them both by years. Bree was curled up with a book still open beside her. Bo had fallen asleep in her track uniform, too exhausted to change clothes. These were the people who mattered, not the friends who were more concerned with avoiding awkwardness than supporting the truth. Not the brother who had betrayed me or the wife who had abandoned us. Just 2 teenage girls who needed their father to be strong enough to protect them from the wreckage of their family. I tucked them both in, turned off the lights, and went back downstairs to plan the final phase of my war. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Beth got nothing, no alimony, no property settlement, no custody rights beyond supervised visitation every other weekend. The prenup she'd signed 12 years ago had been ironclad, and her adultery had voided even the minimal provisions it contained. John's legal challenges had collapsed when his own lawyer discovered the extent of his financial mismanagement. It turned out that those fake business trips had been funded by company money, and the equipment purchases he'd authorized had gone to a shell company he'd created. By the time the forensic accountants finished their investigation, John owed Parish Electrical over $100,000 in embezzled funds. I could have had him arrested. Instead, I offered him a choice: repay the money and disappear, or face federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement. He chose to disappear, selling his house and moving to Arizona with what was left of his savings. Beth lasted 2 weeks after John left town. Without his financial support and with her reputation in ruins, she couldn't afford to stay in the area. She moved back to her parents' house in Ohio, where she was working as a receptionist at a dental office and living in her childhood bedroom at age 36. The friends who had chosen her side discovered that supporting someone involved maintaining that support, even when it became inconvenient. Beth's constant need for emotional validation, financial assistance, and someone to blame for her problems had worn them out within months. Most of them tried to reconnect with me eventually, but I'd learned the value of knowing who your real friends were when things got difficult. Carl became my business partner, buying John's shares at actual fair market value. Together, we'd grown Parish Electrical by 30%, landing 3 major contracts that John's reputation would have cost us. The girls were doing well. Bree had made honor roll and joined the debate team, where her natural intelligence and newfound understanding of human nature made her formidable. Bo had broken 2 school track records and been recruited by colleges that wouldn't have looked at her twice before. On a Thursday evening in late fall, I was in my office finishing paperwork when Mary knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says it's personal." Kyle Morrison stood in the lobby, looking older and more worn than he had at that dinner party that felt like a lifetime ago. His expensive clothes had been replaced with jeans and a work shirt. His perfect teeth looked less white, and his confident smile was nowhere to be seen. "Jamie," he said, "thanks for seeing me. I haven't decided to see you yet. What do you want?" "To apologize and to tell you the truth about what really happened." I studied his face for a long moment, then nodded toward my office. 5 minutes. He sat across from my desk, the same chair John had occupied during our last conversation. But where John had been arrogant and threatening, Kyle just looked tired. "It wasn't Beth's idea," he said without preamble. "The affair, I mean. It was John's." "Explain." "He approached me about 6 months before that dinner. Said he knew about my history with Beth, knew I needed money. He offered me $10,000 to seduce her, to get her to leave you." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Why?" He wanted control of the company. With you out of the picture, he figured your mother would sell him her shares rather than run the business alone. He'd have owned the whole thing. And you agreed. Kyle nodded, not meeting my eyes. I was broke, Jamie. 3 months behind on rent, about to lose my car. $10,000 seemed like winning the lottery. But it didn't work out the way he planned. No, Beth, she fell for it completely. Started talking about leaving you, about us being together. John never expected that. He just wanted her to have an affair, not to actually fall in love. So what went wrong? Kyle finally looked up. I did. I started feeling guilty about what we were doing to you, to your kids. I told John I wanted out, wanted to come clean. That's when he told me the truth, that he'd been sleeping with Beth too. The room was very quiet. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the city winding down for the evening, but inside my office, there was only the hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of betrayal. He was playing both of us, Kyle continued, using me to get Beth away from you, using Beth to get information about your finances and your business plans. When I threatened to tell you everything, he said he'd make sure I went back to prison for violating my parole. Why are you telling me this now? Because John's gone, Beth's gone, and I'm tired of carrying their secrets. And because... He paused, struggling with the words. Because you deserved better than what we did to you. All of us. I leaned back in my chair and considered what he'd told me. It changed nothing about the outcome, but it explained the mechanics of my family's destruction. John hadn't just betrayed me. He'd orchestrated the entire thing, manipulating everyone involved to get what he wanted. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. That's it? What did you expect? Absolution? Forgiveness? You made your choices, Kyle. The fact that John was pulling the strings doesn't change the fact that you chose to dance. He nodded slowly. I know, I wanted you to know that not everyone was lying to you because they wanted to hurt you. Some of us were just too weak to do the right thing. After he left, I sat in my office as darkness fell outside the windows. The building was empty except for me, quiet except for the familiar sounds of electrical systems humming in the walls. I thought about circuits and current, about the way electricity always found the path of least resistance. John had counted on that, on Beth's vanity, on Kyle's desperation, on my trust. He'd built a perfect circuit designed to channel power away from me and toward him. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed that when the system overloaded, I'd be the one to burn out. Instead, I'd become the surge protector, redirecting all that destructive energy back to its source. I turned off the lights, locked the building, and drove home to my daughters, who were waiting with homework questions and stories about their day. We ate dinner together, watched a movie, and talked about their plans for the weekend. It was a good life. Not the life I'd planned, but an honest one, built on truth instead of lies, on loyalty instead of betrayal. And for the first time in months, that was enough.